Right, good day everyone. Welcome to this live recording of the Single Source, the second episode actually of the Single Source, the product data podcast of PIMvendors.com. I'm Stephan Spijkers, I'm the co-founder of PIMvendors.com, and I'm joined by the other co-founder of PIMvendors.com, Chris Jobse. And again, like in the last episode, joining us today from Syndigo is Helen Grimster, the Director of Product Marketing. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to discuss, well, I don't think that we can actually avoid discussing. So we decided to tackle this topic in, well, not maybe the first, but at least somewhere in the beginning of this podcast series. And of course, artificial intelligence. And I think it's hard to ignore the, well, transformational impact that artificial intelligence is already making. I don't want to say has had, because it's not finished yet. We're still in the middle of it, or maybe even at the beginning of it. Let's discuss that today. Of the impact that large language models and the whole generative shift is having on the product information management, master data management, and well, maybe even the whole product data industry. So with me today are Helen and Chris. What I would like to maybe start with is yes, everyone knows that AI is having this transformative impact. What we see, or what is the most logical point for that impact, is the enrichment. Let's use just generation of product descriptions or generation of images as the first starting point. And I think if anyone has been on LinkedIn lately, you would have seen tens, maybe hundreds of these examples each day. You can't avoid them. But I think it's much more than just that, right? So let's just start with that sort of deeper exploration of the impact of artificial intelligence, maybe beyond the surface level impact that it is already having.
Great intro. So I think what the shift that I've seen is that everybody just seems to think that AI in PIM is just, as you say, write me a product description. I mean, that seems to be what everybody thinks it's doing, but that's not the real change we're seeing. I think the real change is when we sort of stop seeing AI as being the actual keyboard, the thing that it's doing, and it starts becoming a colleague. So I think that's the shift that we're seeing people really thinking about. Yes, of course, we can expect it to do some of this cool stuff for us, but the shift is, how far are we going to let it do that? How deep are we going to let that AI get involved within our processes, and how far is that going to go? I mean, I think it's that shift. I would say a year ago, we probably would have been like, oh yeah, it sounds like it's going to be really, really interesting, but we're going to pause, we're going to hold fire. But what I would say is the people that have really embraced it maybe are looking at being able to enrich a much larger catalogue. So it's really thinking about the why we're seeing the shift. I mean, I think there's a definite moment where everybody can see, yes, it's going to save us time. But I think it's really the shift. Are people really embracing AI within PIM? I mean, I could start saying 100 different things, but I don't know what you're seeing, Chris. I mean, that's my sort of intro to it.
Well, what happened is, of course, that the moment ChatGPT came out and people discovered this is the first use case they embraced and said, okay, we need to have a good description. Please help us with that. And of course, that's very valuable. But it's a starting point because there are so many other things within the complete value chain. Where you can apply. But then again, when you start making nice descriptions, you need also a lot of knowledge to work on it. So the prompts needs to be correct, but moreover, the data needs to be correct, because when your data is not correct, it's going to produce, well, also not correct descriptions. I mean, that's very obvious, but from the first point on, people saw things like it's like magic. It will solve our problems. It's not the case. It helps us to solve the problems, but in itself, it doesn't solve the problems.
Absolutely right. I mean, if you're starting with a terrible baseline of product data and you're thinking, I'm going to get a prompt to help me create that really engaging product description, if the sizing's not right, if the color's not right, even if the actual product itself has let's say an SAP type name, what kind of description are you going to get out of that? And I think at the beginning, everybody thought, oh, it's going to lift a whole load of work for that. But of course, that one product description may be great for one channel, but then how do you manage it across multiple? How do you ensure that that prompt is delivering the value wherever you need it as well? So, I mean, you've already seen some horrible AI generated content in a product description because people think they can just let it go and let it run and not have to let it be checked by a human. And I think that's the bit that got overlooked, is that we still absolutely need a human in the loop until we have the confidence in that underlying sort of foundational product data to be the best it can be, to then allow AI to do those tasks for you. So I think you're absolutely correct in saying it can be magic, but it can only be magic if it has the right recipe to actually deliver on that. So I think there was so much discussion about what it can do without really thinking about it needs to have good data to do those things for you.
Data, good processes, you need to orchestrate this within your organization. And but starting from this point where everybody started to be enthusiastic about AI, it was a little seed which was planted for all the other things to come. And we more and more see other use cases within the whole value chain of creating content. And that really starts from the beginning. You get data in, and maybe you get crappy data in, and you need to do something with that. And that's a completely different use case, but also AI can help the organizations with that to create better based content. But still, you need to orchestrate it, and still you need the human in the loop until you have enough trust that you can let it go on certain aspects. You really need to define this process, and where do I need to interfere as a human, and where can I let it go? And that's something which I see, especially with customers starting with PIM, and they say, okay, we need AI, and it solves all our problems. No, it's not really. It helps.
Absolutely. I mean, it's there to maybe help you speed up some of those more manual processes, to remove some of that friction. And I think some of the really, maybe the second generation or third generation use cases for AI, such as being able to help you when you're ingesting large volume from a supplier. Maybe, for example, if they're giving you things like manuals that have got really interesting information in them, and allowing an AI to go in and help extract some of that data that would take, a human days to do. I think these are the things where people are really beginning to see the value, but you've got to trust the data. And I think that's been the biggest blocker for people actually really leaning into AI. And I think it's the one area that allows people to really sort of pause before they really dive in. And that's definitely the feedback that I've seen. I don't know about you.
Well, we see it in the market, right? I think that everyone started very enthusiastically experimenting with just copy pasting into ChatGPT and getting pretty good results. But then figuring out that you need to have that foundation that we also discussed in the first episode, where you need to have that good data quality to actually really leverage your AI capabilities and to make your product data available to these models and all your downstream systems, and actually start using AI, start using the benefits of AI. You need to have that foundation in place. And we see that in the market as well, because where you would expect people to really dive in and lean into these super fancy AI tools that are built on top of these large language models, I think we actually see a lot of companies trying to fix that foundation and actually turning to master data management and product information management and building the systems and the foundational layer, because you can't do anything with those fancy tools if you don't have that foundation in place.
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. And I think for me, the biggest area where people haven't really leveraged AI is the ingestion of data. And I think, you're talking about that foundational layer, of course, MDM and PIM and all of that kind of thing. But it's a lot of the times I think is forgotten is that some of that data isn't owned by you. If you are if you are ingesting information from your suppliers, for example, you're relying on them to give you great data. So, I mean, I don't know how many conversations I've had around, how do I fix the problems with my suppliers? Do I build myself a portal? Do I help, on board through a different method? But, the biggest truth is that for most companies, if they're getting their data from suppliers, they don't control that. Unless they are massive and they enforce a particular format on people, Amazon, for example, of course they do, but on the day-to-day average people, you can only take what you can from your suppliers. So we've had templates, we've had strict rules, we've had please fill in these 125 fields, they don't, or they do it so badly they might as well have not bothered. So I think it's thinking about some of these maybe other use cases that are much more beneficial than just a product description. So I think that for me is where perhaps we're moving towards, that is how we can leverage AI for some of those really tricky use cases within the PIM landscape and being able to really do that. So I think the other part, I'm sorry, I'm just getting overexcited again, is the governance of that as well. And of course, that's one of the biggest things is how do you govern AI generated data? I've covered so many different things. I've gone off on a tangent on about 6 different topics.
No worries. It starts with that onboarding, right? So
yes.
Even if you're coming from an existing situation with your existing data, onboarding that to a new quality level is basically onboarding, right? You take data, you're trying to validate what it is, you're trying to maybe transform it into something else. You want to make sure that it matches what you expect in your product data model. You might want to enrich parts of it or map parts of it differently. You want to classify your product data. Maybe you want to classify it differently so you can map it correctly and enrich it correctly. So as Chris already mentioned, that getting the benefits of AI means using AI to get better quality data and really build that foundation. And Helen, you said correctly, there's so many steps happening in onboarding, right? It's cleansing, it's transformation, it's mapping, it's validation. All of those small steps, those in-between steps can already help moving you from point A, where you are right now, to point B, or get either that is your current data set or what you get from suppliers. Move that from data level, let's say 50% to 80, 90, 100%. And I think what is very important here is, yes, you can ask a baseline model. You can ask Claude, or you can ask ChatGPT or Gemini to cleanse this data or map it or do this. But I think if you look in the market right now, there are some very interesting tools that are available to really do this specific task, this specific objective, and do it really well at scale, right? So you don't burn all your tokens, you don't burn all your ChatGPT budget just on onboarding the first 5,000 items. And there's so much things we can unpack here. I think we need a separate episode on AI onboarding. I'm not sure how you see this, Chris, the onboarding application.
In this case also, what's important that you have industry specific tooling, because every industry has its own way of treating data and its own definitions. And you can go to this Claude or environment, or you can go to another generic environment, and you will get a lot of data, but not always the right definitions for the industry. So I think that's also something we have to look into. Who is delivering what kind of data in the right way? And of course, then there is this other thing, which because AI is here already for some time, it's going to stay here, and what you see is now there are also regulations going on. What can I do with AI? What am I allowed to do? Do I need to keep track on this information? Because AI generated content can be even potentially dangerous when it's not done correctly. So there is also a lot of regulation going on from especially from the EU point of view. Not so much.
I just wanted to maybe quickly use this opportunity, Chris. There's actually a question from the audience on exactly this. Like, how do you prevent AI from adding data to your own quality check data, right? So how do you make sure that the AI doesn't go wild with its input? How do you both see that? How do you prevent AI from going rogue in that sense?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is again governance, because you really need to have your processes in place, and within those processes you can have checks, and you can say, okay, this data which is generated is valuable and correct, but this data is maybe not so correct. We need to keep a human in the loop, for instance. So governance is key in this kind of processes.
And again, I think it's also building validation rules into what's coming in, making sure that it does make sense, making sure that you can check for the validity of what's been created by the AI, and also thinking about your tolerance levels as well, depending on what products you are enriching. Do you have different tolerances depending on the type of product? Clearly, if it's something really, electrical, you've got to be really careful about that. Something like baby food, again, anything that's really, you cannot get it wrong. Whereas I'm not going to say it doesn't matter so less for apparel, but do you have a different tolerance level there as well? And I think it's also thinking about different categories may require different validation and different governance. But I think it's also, you really, as Chris said, you really need to be thinking about how do you make sure there's a check before it goes live. Does a human approve that, and so on? Because otherwise you could just let AI go wild and publish all sorts of claims and all sorts of things that you can't back up. And particularly in the age of litigation, that's the last thing that you want. You want to make sure that everything that you've generated is as accurate as it can be. And it will never be 100%. Well, it would be lovely if it was, but we know that there's always some level of tolerance within that. So I think that, as you said, governance, but making sure that the governance rules are flexible enough to be against whatever type of product that you have.
Yeah, that's I mean, it's boring, but it's governance, and governance is important, and it does mean also you need to have, of course, the tooling to support that, right? So it is important that maybe a tool or an AI model is not the fix, right? It's not an immediate fix to solve all your problems, but it does. Yeah, you need to have the ability to put those governance rules in. Otherwise, you're basically managing your governance rules manually, and you're basically back to square one. So that's it's I think great to touch that. Maybe one more thing where I see a lot of benefit, or where I see a lot of benefit in either the workflow management of this onboarding process, and using AI, is you basically go from a human first type of approach and a human centered type of approach to a human more as a validator, right? So the human is not the origin and the source of all the product data, but it's more of a validator or checker of the data that is generated. And to go to that, current, I would say, phase, almost, you need to have these governance rules in place. I think you also need to have the tooling to support you. And one of the things that I see lacking, for example, in just a normal API call to Claude or an API call to ChatGPT is, for example, a confidence scoring, right? You want to give that confidence score back to that validator to give them an indication or maybe even trigger governance rules that say, if the confidence score is lower than this threshold, escalate it to a human validator to check the manual, to have the manual check and the manual check in place, because that provides so much more relief when it comes to, well, basically, again, governance of your product data. So you can let the AI do its thing on maybe 95% of your product catalog, but only 5% that is highly critical, like critical spares, or I think you mentioned, Helen, already, foodstuffs, or that's stuff you want to maybe have a human validator check one by one, or check on a much higher threshold, that if the AI is not 100% sure about a classification or an attribute, that you have a human in the loop to check that. But have that human in the loop in a smart way, not in a blunt way.
And even it starts before that, I think, because you need to have a good definition of your data. So metadata is really, really important, because otherwise AI doesn't know what to return. So that's the starting point, and then you can validate it against those rules.
I mean, I think you made a really valid point about, the whole accountability, auditability of everything that the AI does. I mean, I think the thing that you want to be thinking about is who actually approved it, as in, did somebody check what had come through, and that you've actually had that, and there's actually a tick box within the tool so that you've got that as a sort of check and balance. It's almost going to become, perhaps as we move forward, one of the most important fields within the system, as in who approved this, who said this was the correct content. And I think, and it is going back again to governance, it's no longer abstract. It's so important that that is embedded so that you can actually make sure that whatever was changed by the AI or however it's done, that you can make sure that that's okay. Because as we know, if you've got something wrong, and once it's syndicated out, because it's not just going to one channel anymore, it's going to have a huge blast radius. That one thing that you've got wrong, and if you just let it go through and it hasn't had that validation, that to your reputation or to everything that you do, just that one thing could impact you so much. So I think as we move forward, it becomes, PIM becomes more than just a repository. It will become an accountability layer. And I think that's the difference between doing all of this inside Claude or Perplexity or whatever it is that you're using. You need to have that ability to say, this is where it came from and we've approved it. And I think bypassing an actual tool like a PIM is going to cause you the issue. So, I mean, a lot of, I'm sure we've all been asked, and I know I have, I don't need a PIM anymore. I can do all of this inside an LLM. But you of course, you can do that enrichment, but how can you prove it was the right thing? How can you validate that? And I think that's another really important thing that you're going to capture inside of PIM as we move forward. And it's also around the provenance and making sure that everything's correct. And as we're moving into more things like the digital product passport and making sure that the packaging and all of that is correct, you absolutely have to have that audit trail, and you cannot get that inside an LLM.
Yeah,
that's another really important thing.
And then it starts who is responsible within the company and who's doing this. And,
well, it is a question from the audience, actually, where the question is, can we use AI to check AI, right? That is, but that is, if I can answer that question, that is the confidence scoring, and it is a type of setup that is much more supported by the dedicated AI data cleansing tools that are out there, versus the less sophisticated workflows that we see people use in the wild that are custom built, right? So yes, you can use an automation, an N8N agentic type of workflow to check output in different stage gates. We don't often see that complexity in the wild. It's also much more scalable to have this AI check AI type of layering, which at least all the AI companies that we work with on the data cleansing front use that setup. to get to those confidence scores and to get to the highest quality output. And then feed that process data with maybe the confidence scoring back into the PIM or the user interface that the validator or the human in the loop is using.
One other thing that I think people really forget about is the versioning of the content, making sure that you can, should something terrible happen, not that I'm saying it would with an AI, that you can roll it back so that you can actually say that this is the version that's been created by wherever it's come from, and that at any point, should that confidence level go below what you're expecting it to, or should it get published, or however that is, that you have that ability to go back to the previous version that's been approved or whatever that is, and you can then have that trail of, look, we made a mistake or something's gone wrong, we have a better version down behind us. And that is something that you would not get without having something like a PIM in place. I think that's another really important reason for, well, not going wild with AI and just letting it do whatever it is. I think it's very boring. Versioning is like, oh God, that's just like not very exciting at all. But it's your backup. It's the thing that you can go back to should something terrible happen. So I think another reason for thinking about, I need a tool behind me to make sure that whilst AI is doing all this great stuff, I can go back to the reality should it go off and do things that I'm not expecting it to do.
That's a great point, Helen. And I think in addition to that, you might want to have some kind of data lineage in place where you can see like, oh, this field was filled by AI and then validated by a human, or it was just filled but never validated because it didn't hit the threshold. So you can always look back and see, oh, I need to change my data governance rules and change those so that the thresholds are correctly configured for the output that I want. And then having the ability to have rollback functionality is, I think, crucial, because one of the other things that we see so often going wrong with new technology, maybe in general, but specifically with large language models, is that everyone thinks that this is amazing and very easy, and you push your whole product catalog through, you enrich 500,000 SKUs, and suddenly a month in, you get to see some errors, and you don't know which of the product data was original, what is synthetic, what was AI generated, and you're basically in this very zero trust environment where you cannot roll back. That's one, but you also don't know what you can trust anymore in the situation. So if you don't have that rollback functionality, it's a one-way door, and that is a very dangerous door to cross. And we see too often that door is crossed without any hesitation. Sometimes that leads to some complications down the road.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's interesting to see that we started off this conversation with AI being used for nice descriptions, blah blah blah, but actually we are shifting back to the start of the data and where it all starts and how we can improve that process before even thinking about fancy descriptions and fancy way of output of the data.
Yeah, it's all processes and humans in the end that needs to be solved first before you can start building the cool fancy stuff. And it's great that the market is now starting to realize this, right? So another commenter also commented on that you need to have these governance rules in place, because if you don't have this infrastructure or this foundation in place, it basically all comes crashing down if you just let AI go wild. I think that's entirely true, and we see that in practice as well, and we see that realization now happening, right? So it's year 3 of ChatGPT, basically. I mean, it's an older technology, but that it has seen the public space. And yes, we still see people making those one-way door mistakes, but still, there's also a growing group of organizations that do tackle this in a smart and sustainable and scalable way, and that is, I think, the only way to go. Now, what I maybe want to move forward to is the enrichment phase, right? So I think what we have seen is the onboarding and how much AI can help there. And if people struggle with that and struggle with that data cleansing, I would say definitely reach out to Helen or Chris or myself, see how we can help you. But there's so much more to explore in this podcast. So let's quickly go forward to I would say the space that most people are familiar with when it comes to generative AI is the generation of the content, the product data content. Now, if we started this conversation with, it goes beyond this generation, and I think even here there's so much more to explore than just the generic create a quick description. For me, if we look at what is happening in the market and maybe some interesting tools that we see out there, what do we see happening? What do we see customers struggle with maybe? And what do we see them, where do we see them leveraging AI to generate the best results?
I think for me, it's being able to, I mean, we talk about the enrichment, absolutely, but being able to find those anomalies. So obviously, if you are trying to leverage it for enrichment, it's thinking about if you can take that AI to really help you be smarter and to sort of think about it from that side of things. So being able to do things like looking for anomalies like a product weight being unrealistic or a size being unrealistic. So really almost giving you sort of prompts as to where you can really help you fix the data. And I think we can all talk about product descriptions and all of that kind of thing, but also things like where you've generated a product description and then you look at another set of attributes and what's in that attribute actually contradicts what's been generated in the product description. So I think it's taking it down to making it more an intelligent tool to really ensure that what you're doing from that enrichment perspective is the best thing. And I just think it's being able to go deeper within those use cases and being able to really take that power of checking and validating the data a bit further. So if you are enriching, and I mean, we were just talking about one version right now, of course, as we know, only having one version of content is very, very rare these days. We may have 200 different versions for different channels, different languages, different whatever that is. So if you get it wrong in one, what's that going to do for all of your variants of that content? So I think for me, it's going deeper with the AI to really make it reduce the friction in what you have to do. So it's really making it do smarter things, I think, from an enrichment perspective. That's kind of where I'm seeing some of the things that people are doing with it, is to really try and make what they're doing smarter, I think, rather than it's still about enrichment. And that's one use case. I'm sure you have others, Chris. That's my first one.
Yeah, but when you go into product description, creation, I also have to think about localization. Used to be you have some localization engine or translation engine, so to say, and you are translating text which you created in Dutch or in English or in French or whatever into different languages. But what you see with AI is that you can much more localize this data. So in Spain, they have a different culture than in Germany. So literal translation maybe doesn't work. So you need to take into account also the local atmosphere, the local way of talking about products, and that's something which you can do with AI. Certain tools do provide this, and I think this will bring it to the next level. So you're not talking about just one base language and different languages. Yeah, some attributes. Yeah, you just want to translate literally, but also the marketing text you can do much more nowadays with certain AI tools than you could do half a year ago or a year ago.
I think
the other thing, of course, is being able to actually do that content generation from that as well. I think it's that being much smarter by being able to leverage it to maybe fill in incomplete attributes and maybe make suggestions of things that could go there. And I think that's, particularly if you are getting information from, I'm going to go back to suppliers because I'm quite obsessed with that topic. If you get their manuals and things, that you can then use the AI to extract the information that the suppliers haven't given you. So making suggestions to enrich that and to do that content generation. I think those are the tasks that really you can get from taking AI one step further, particularly in the enrichment phase. And of course, we haven't talked about images yet. I mean, that is probably the one area that people get super excited about is, can I leverage AI to look at the product image and sanity check across that? Have I got an image where it's a yellow shoe, but I'm talking about a red shoe? I mean, then that's very basic. But those kind of things that you can do just to save you time or whatever it is. So I think that whole ability to take it one step further and maybe use some of the assets that you've already got to make your products better on the page, or to make it more engaging for your customers so that they actually buy it, which of course is the whole reason for what we're talking about, then I think that's another area that people are really leaning into, is that image part as well. I don't know if you're seeing that, but I'm definitely seeing people thinking, oh, I could do more with that.
Yeah, no, I think you're entirely right, Helen. Maybe before we go into that part, let me quickly wrap up the translation bit, because there's also a quick question here. So there's a question again around sort of context for a specific cultural region, and I think that AI is very specifically tailored to do that. When you look at how traditional translation engines work versus, which is just a translation of an existing baseline text, original text, and you compare and contrast that to AI, where you can basically regenerate a description based on the same baseline attributes, right? So you take the attributes that you have and you generate a new culturally sensitive new description based on the attributes, basically building it from the bottom up instead of taking an existing description and translating that. And there are some tools that do this really well. I have this cultural sensitivity in place. I think the other thing that you might want to use here are what we could call data dictionaries, where you have like local variations in how you call the same type of product, right? So a spanner is a wrench, but you need to be aware that that is actually the same product or the same name for the same type of product. And those types of, I would say, nuances, baseline models just don't fully understand right now. And you need to have this, I would say, culturally sensitive, context specific, or context aware AI to help you with those types of translations. Now, having said that, going to the images, I think multimodality, so image and video on top of the text, is indeed the new and exciting frontier here. And the example that Helen already gave, with images being used to validate product data or even maybe extract attributes, is, I think, a very, very interesting use case, especially in, I would say, environments that are very data poor, right? So take or that have lots of product going in and out every season. Take fashion as an example. You use the example of the red and yellow shirt. Fashion usually starts with an image. Well, you need the image anyway to sell a product. That's the most important thing you need downstream to sell it to a customer. So you will have an image of that product anyway. We see customers using AI models to then distill the attributes from that image. And that's a great way of leveraging the power of AI to quickly fill the product data of a shirt or a pair of pants with hopefully confidence scored product data. So you can quickly onboard those products to your catalog without having a human copywriter typing all that data into text fields. How do you see images or even video being used in this enrichment step?
I mean, it's exactly that. It's being able to maybe backfill information that perhaps you didn't have, or because a lot of the time, and particularly for maybe things like spare parts or high volume, maybe lower cost items as well, sometimes it's being able to see that image, because a lot of the times you may not have the information that you need to really make a good description. So I think being able to take that and bring that information in is really important. of course, it's making sure that the image is the right one in the first place. And I think that validation check of, does this image tie up with the information I've got so far, is a really strong start anyway, as in, does this, is this actually the right image? I mean, that to me is the beginning of it. And then being able to dive in and say, oh, I'd like to get, maybe more detailed of how maybe perhaps it's being used, because sometimes you might get more lifestyle images that come with that product and so on. And can you use those to make it more of a better description and so on? But definitely, I think that's going to be the area that people can really be quicker and faster at filling in some of those really important key attributes that they haven't had the information for before. So definitely seeing people leveraging that moving forward. I don't know if you have anything more to add, Chris.
Yeah, I think that's the important part, and especially with the low cost or low margin products, you definitely can gain a lot of speed in this process. It's also the other way around, creating images based on information. I mean, there are many ways of using this, and so there also in fashion, for instance, when you have someone with a red skirt and you want to also have the blue and the yellow and the green one, you don't have to make shoots again, but you can really create those images with AI. And of course, you need to be careful how to do this, and also to check. But it can save a lot of time. And of course, in the past, you had this CGI kind of working with furniture, for instance. Well, that's, I think, also something from the past already, because you can use AI for this nowadays.
Yeah.
And I think, as you say, and it is things like being able to build maybe more of those lifestyle images. You've got a product and you might want to put it into something. Of course, we've all seen where it has gone wrong with the six fingers, hands, and all of that kind of thing. But we are moving on, hopefully, from that. But I do think it does have, particularly as you say, if you wanted to create variants really quickly, or if you wanted to just be able to spin things up that needed to be done. But again, it's making sure that it's doing what you want it to do, and that the output is what you're expecting from it. So I also think the other really interesting part is when you are looking at things like fashion, it's the colours as well. It maybe AI can help you match the colour of that product to maybe the way that you describe that, because obviously in the fashion world, you've got red, but then you've got crimson, and you've got ruby, and you've got all of these other, maybe the ways that people describe red is so different in fashion, and also in beauty as well, than just red. So I think it's that, can you leverage AI to give you the maybe more the Pantone or the shade that perhaps you didn't have before, or then you can match it to how you describe it, because of course in beauty you would never just do it red. You'd have some great name for it. Like, I mean, my favorite lipstick, which I'm wearing today, is called Ruby Woo. So I mean, obviously that would not be just red. So I think that's another really great use case for images, is being able to tie the colors back to it as well, and being able to really, within fashion and those where it really, the color actually really matters, is a really strong use case.
Yeah, and I think especially where you want to have that rich product experience, where maybe you want to have a fashion shoot with a model that is even localized to the region that you're selling. Doing that manually costs time and a lot of money to do that with a human model. But you're seeing pretty good localization or image generation, fashion inspirational shoot generation already happening right now. And the same is true for home and living as well, where you have to move around these big bulky items, put them in a setting, do one shot, and then basically you have to redesign the whole space again. All those very intensive, time-consuming things you can now do much more quicker with AI. And I think maybe a year ago, those were still low resolution, easy to identify. With a discerning eye, you could identify that this was an AI-generated image. It's getting harder and harder. And the question is, does it even matter if it's AI-generated? or not, if it serves the purpose of communicating that rich product experience. And I think similarly, we haven't touched on this yet, is video, right? So especially with fashion, where you might want to see the product and experience the product in a richer way, seeing it in multiple angles and having a model walk around. Well, on Zalando, you already see models walking, I think human models still, in clothes to show the drape and how it looks and feels on the model in a short video. I can only imagine that those will be replaced with AI as well, or this is just for the A type of the catalog, right? The high margin, high volume stuff. The long tail will get the AI generated videos, and it's great. I mean, if it is correct, then it is great to have that with AI.
Next level will be that it's not on the model, but it's on you. So
Yes.
yeah.
Already seeing that with some things, aren't you? Like, how does it look on you? And it's funny because we talked about beauty, but absolutely some of the makeup manufacturers you can put your face in there and they AI generate the makeup onto you to see if it's the right shade or what it looks like. I mean, I know from even glasses as well. You can go onto some of those websites and you can try it on to see if it suits your face. So I think it's definitely the future, and it may be that you can even upload a picture of you in one part of your outfit, and then they can generate, superimpose the thing that you're looking at, or help you build it on your body so that you can see, does it actually suit me? And I think that is one of the things, because of course those kind of use cases are going to reduce the number of returns, increase the conversion rates, because you're going to have good feedback on it. So some of these maybe what sounds like magic from the bottom line are going to really help with that whole product and customer experience. So I think whilst it sounds like, as we said at the beginning, magic, it's really going to help you promote your products and build that loyalty. And I know that I would love to see what something looks like on my own body before I bought it. So I think that's not going to be far away.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still sometimes a little bit clumsy nowadays, but we have to go through this clumsy phase, I think, before we can get to the better version.
I think maybe going back to the human element of this, it takes a different type of approach to get to this new phase, right? So instead of typing in the data manually, or project managing a shoot, or video editing a video, you now have a different role as a content manager, or as a master data manager, or as a product information manager. Maybe you don't need to be an AI coder, right? I think very few of us actually are, or maybe even need to be, but you need to have a different type of skill set in 2026 than what you used to be able to do, or maybe on top of what you were already doing, which is much more focused on using AI in the best way possible for your organization, and for to get to the best result for your product data. If we just take a few minutes to explore that, like, how do you see that skill set change?
I mean, I think it's a great for people. It's really making sure that people understand it's not taking away your job. It's actually changing your job. And I think you've sort of summarized that by saying you'll have a different skill set and you'll need to do different things, but you still need humans. And I think that's what worried people so much when AI came along, and they were worried that they were going to lose their jobs. But I think what people really need to think about now, within, if you're managing your product data and you're enriching your product data, it's just a different process. And if anything, it allows you to do more and enrich more products, maybe not just that top 5,000 or whatever it was before. You can get to cover a much broader spectrum, but it is a pivot from perhaps being much more of a, typing stuff in, or actually, maybe you don't have to think of things as much, but it's helping prompt you to come up with new ways of describing your products, or making sure that it lands. So I think it is a natural progression, but I don't think you cannot underestimate the value of a human within the loop. AI is there to help you do things at speed and reduce some of that friction, but you are going to have to pivot to think about oh, how do I make this smarter for me? So I think that is what the changes from the people using the things like PIM and AI together. So I think that for me is a massive change, but for me, I'm sure that's quite exciting as well, because you're doing something different. It's not the same old cut and paste or the same
You're not
whatever it was.
you're not calling every supplier again. I need some data. I need some data. Can you send some pictures? Blah blah blah. Things like that. So it makes your work more interesting, I think, in the end. If you are willing to change. I mean, a lot of people, they think, okay, I'm doing this job, and then when things change, it's too much for me and things. So you need really, as a company, also think about what skills do you want to have from your employees, and that's an important shift as well.
Because it's change management yet again.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
boils down to, how do you empower the people that are doing their jobs to embrace this change, and you make sure that they understand what they're doing, but they get the best out of it, because that they understand that they don't have to accept what the AI has generated, but also they can help improve those algorithms, help improve the output. So I think you're absolutely right, Chris. It's making sure that everybody gets behind it and really embraces that, but make sure that give people that chance to learn what to do, and because it's going to be a little bit glitchy, as everything is when you get something new, but to be supportive and really help train people on what the difference is and how it's going to make their jobs different. I mean, that for me is the whole change management piece, and I think that's sometimes forgotten. It is quite scary, as you say. If you've been doing something in your copywriting or your content creation for 10, 15 years in a certain way, something coming along like this, it's daunting, it's terrifying. So I think it's helping people really understand what that means for them in their job, and how they can feel confident in what they're doing.
Yeah. Is that maybe that change management and that data governance processes and the setup of the processes, is that maybe not the gap that we've seen between the sort of hype of AI that we see on LinkedIn and in the different tools and the cool tech demos, and the actual value that needs to be delivered by the application of these AI tools? And maybe taking that one step further, how would you try to close that gap between the hype that we see every day when we open up our phones and maybe the daily drudgery and the daily grind that we see in our day-to-day operations?
It's all about awareness, I think. Awareness of every person, not just the management, but every person in the company. Awareness what the things they're doing now, day to day, will cause, and if they don't take care of things, what will happen. So also the bad things, but also the good things. So.
I mean, I think for me, the biggest thing that people, the hype and everything is, and we've said it right at the very beginning, and we'll probably keep saying it every time we talk, is if you've got bad data, none of this works. So I think it's just being really cognizant of, this is the dream scenario of having something coming in, but thinking about the fact that AI doesn't actually remove that need for governance, that need for good data. It just moves it to something else. It moves it from maybe forms and rules to maybe thinking about making sure that the data, the probabilities and the exceptions within that data. So I think it's still the same conversation that we're having about, you need good data, but it may be coming from different sources as well. And then making sure that people that are working within that, and that they understand that it is slightly different, and that we are pivoting away from that. And I think it's still exactly the same. It doesn't matter whether AI is coming along, it's governance and data that matter, because without that and having good data, none of this happens. And I think that for me is, we can go on about how wonderful AI is and all the great things it can do, but it still comes down to, it can only work on the foundation that you give it.
Exactly. I think that's actually a great place to end the podcast, Helen, with those wise words. It all starts with the data, and yes, you need the tooling, but you need the processes and the data governance and the people first. I want to thank you both for joining me today on this episode on AI. I know that we couldn't avoid talking about AI, and I'm pretty sure we'll discuss artificial intelligence.
We haven't even started with agentic. Come on, we didn't even go there.
We can talk each week about the AI developments, and maybe we should, but that's maybe something we can consider if the audience thinks so. If you do, let us know. You know where to reach us or find us. I'm probably sure you can find Helen, Chris, and myself on LinkedIn. Thank you for joining us today. We had a very lively session with a lot of interaction. Feel free to join us in the next session, which I'll be posting online quite soon. So check out the PIMvendors.com page and follow us there so you'll be aware when we do the next session, either with Helen or another guests, because though we love Helen, we also have lots of people to talk to about specific subjects. But we'll sure be back in this setup for sure. So follow us, and thank you for today. Have a great weekend and see you soon. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.